We are reaching the conclusion of Dowd, the Son of God, the Messiah and returning kings, Ode to the Chakmah Choter. This is episode 9. And as a quick refresher, 3,000 years ago, the king who united Israel and who brought them to Jerusalem, who established the city as the city of Dowd, wrote a proverb, which is a word picture, a mashal, about the man who, as his bashar, herald, would reintroduce his acclaim and his achievements to his people, Yisrael, doing so before his return as king. And therefore, as we redress the mashal word pictures, Proverbs 14:30, we read, "The bashar heralds lives restore good judgment." And that is what's necessary. Israel has not engaged in good judgment regarding Yahowah or Dowd, their Messiah and King, for a very, very long time. As a matter of fact, for the country as a whole, it lost sight of Dowd's unique place with Yahowah and their purpose with their God during Dowd's reign as king. And it all came crumbling down under Solomon, such that shortly thereafter, the northern kingdom was plucked to pieces and 10 of the 12 tribes were hauled away into slavery and to obscurity until quite recently. And the problem is that no one's thinking. The material has been there for a very long time. I now spend, as you know, a goodly portion of my time posting on YouTube, X, Rumble, and of course, mostly on Facebook. And I do so to try to restore good judgment, to bring the hearts, the minds back of Yisrael, so that they recognize Yahweh's name and they realize the importance Dowd plays in their lives. It is the job of the corporeal messenger. And it is so interesting here that towards the conclusion of the mashal, Dowd brings up this name, Bashar, speaking of his herald, because it is a name with two rather important connotations. The first of those is what I'm doing for you now, which is to speak directly to you, to convey the good news that Yahweh can be known again, that his name is being proclaimed once again, and that Dowd fulfilled Pesach, Matzah, and Bekorim, so that you might become part of his covenant family and enjoy forevermore in his kingdom. This is indeed good news. And Bashar's second connotation, beyond being a conveyor of a very positive message, and this is the most positive we could possibly convey, is to be someone who uses their corporeal body in a productive way. Now, Dowd would be the foremost exemplar of this, in that he used his body to fulfill Pesach, Passover, as the lamb, to give his people life. And I will give up mine on Towrah to reclaim the reputation of the surviving remnant of Yisrael, so that the adulterous woman, representing the wayward religious nature of God's people, might be redeemed, cleansed, and prepared to be betrothed to the returning king in Dowd. And so we are the two men as the greater and lesser luminaries who have fulfilled Moed for the purpose of restoring the lives of God's people. And it is lives plural in this case because there are a number of things that Dode, who is David, and I share in common. And one of them is that we will be among the very few who live 3 lives. Elia, myself, and Dode are the exemplars of individuals who will live 3 lives. Dode's 3 lives are particularly important to us. He lived 3,000 years ago as the young boy who was anointed Messiah, was selected from all humans alive at the time to serve as God's beloved son. Inspired as a prophet, hailed as a king, from the experience of a shepherd to serve as our Savior. And that was the first of his 3 lives. It is a resume that would be the greatest even among kings if that was it. But during that first life, it was quite tumultuous, and Dode was the ultimate exemplar also of fractured families, which is an essential aspect of understanding Yahowah. His first family was fractured in the garden. Those who lived outside the garden were fractured again, with Noah being the one who would save them. And even the descendants of Noah fractured again. And of course, you look how broken the relationship was with Abraham. He was, to a large degree, a scallywag. And yet it's through him that the narrative of the covenant was given to us. But even in him, you had the example of a fractured family, with Ishmael representing Islam and being sent away with his mother, the Hagar, the slave woman, and the covenant being based upon a relationship between Sarah and her son, a son named Laughter, Yishak, play, happiness, the promise of Yahowah, but a fractured family. And then when Yishak had sons, we have a fracture again between Esau, the man who preferred hunting, the man who prioritized death versus life, with Jacob. And therefore, once again, we have this exemplar of a fractured family, where one was chosen, the other was sent away. And of course, even when we see Yishak get married, he wanted one sister and got the other. And yet it's the one that he didn't choose, Leah, that provided us with Yahud, that became Jews, and Yehudim, the beloved of Yah. And yet their sons would tear that family apart. They would immediately sell one of their own into slavery. The last of them was so horrible, even in his gestation, he killed his mother. A fractured family. When Moshe tried to save them later on, they turned against him. A fractured family. The moment they began the Exodus, they were embittered, turned against God and said, no, we'd rather go back and be slaves in Mitzrayim. A fractured family. Moshe returns them to Mount Choreb, goes to the summit, comes down with the 10 statements that Yahweh wrote in stone, and they're off, including his own brother, making a religious idol to worship that. The ultimate fractured family, fractured now from Yahweh. And then they proceed a little further, and Moshe's own family turned against him, both Miriam and Aaron, claiming that they also spoke for God while disparaging Moshe's wife. You could not have a more fractured family than is Israel. And that is what needs to be restored. And so it is essential that we understand that. And even in this mashal, this word picture regarding the Chakmah Choter, it begins by saying that what he thought was family was fractured. The moment that the Yahowah blog was to proceed, the old crew vanished. Oh, they didn't vanish. They went away to be rebellious, to be embittered, to be like Miriam. And they gave us yet another example of a fractured family, so that I could speak to you, Israel, the ultimate fractured family from Yahweh, and so that my words would have empathy, having endured it. And yes, like Dod, like Moshe, I've endured it with my own genetic family. We all have. It is the common denominator among us. And you look at Israel today, you could not have a more fractured family. You have progressives trying to blame everything on the conservative government. And they would bring it down in the name of democracy, even though they represent 20% of Israel, and 80% of Israel favors this current government, or certainly half of Israel at the last election favored this current government. I don't know what percentage favors it now. There's kind of a three divisive contingencies within Israel: the progressives that will claim everything and anything to bring down the Netanyahu coalition. And then on the other side, of course, you have the Haredim that are useless parasites that threaten to bring it down if they don't get their way. They're simply bribed to keep the coalition alive. The most useless people in Israel, the most counterproductive people in Israel, worse than the progressives, are the Haredim, the ultra-Orthodox. And in this middle, you have quasi-moderates. I think they're considerably right of center from normal politics, that can't stand either side. It is a house divided. And the only way to restore that is to restore what the heart represents in Hebrew, which is the seat of good judgment. It is the place where our attitude and our inclinations coalesce with our thinking. And that's what's not happening in Israel. And as a result, people are dying. And they're dying for nothing. I posted the most recent post on Facebook is about two really outstanding young men, both of whom died yesterday in tunnels, trying to clear tunnels, trying to investigate really whether those tunnels housed their brethren who were kidnapped and stolen for ransom by the Muslims in Gaza. And Israel has incorrectly, and this comes from the leader of the IDF all the way down to most of the people of Israel, have come to prioritize hostages over the survival of the country. They'll trade Islamic terrorists to release hostages, doing a deal with the devil that is suicidal and will cost far more lives in the long run. And now they would rather send their own sons into Gaza to go into booby-trapped tunnels to see if they can find hostages and free them, then they would protect Israel from the onslaught of Islam. It's tragic. And in so doing, Israel has lost, 800 lives? Trying to, well, now there's maybe 25 living left. Reminds me of the foolishness of war. The United States wants to proclaim that they won World War II when the European theater was won by the Russians, but we don't like the Russians. But we Americans are brainwashed into hating the Russians, so they won't recognize that Germany was defeated by the Red Army, not by America, not by France, not by the UK. And that in the Pacific theater, while the United States prevailed against Imperial Japan, at what cost? When you sacrifice hundreds of thousands of lives, probably 300,000 sacrificed in the Pacific theater to avenge the deaths of 3,000 at Pearl Harbor, that's not moral. That's not winning. And yet that's what we did. And Israel is sacrificing additional lives to spare hostages that, if you're thinking as opposed to feeling, you know that what matters is the very survival of the state, its ability to protect Jews from Muslims. And you don't achieve that the way you're going about prosecuting this war. So Dode also says, however, the essential essence and physical substance, even the corporeal mass of a person, their estem, their essential nature, who are envious and jealous, and boy, in Israel they are, for power and for all manner of political advantage or religious advantage, who are envious and jealous, it rots and decays from a degenerative parasitical fungus. This is one of the great problems of religion. Religion has this tendency to prioritize the flesh. Now, it's never been as bad as it is in Islam, where the flesh of dead jihadists is tantalized in Allah's brothel of virginal babes, and it is tormented in Allah's hellish retreat of hellfires. And it's always physical bodies, not smart enough to recognize that you're not going into a next life with a physical body to ravage virgins or to be tortured by a wannabe God. And of course, in Christianity, because their wannabe God was resurrected going the wrong direction, they all think that they're going to be resurrected and going to have physical bodies in the hereafter, and that those who don't capitulate to their wannabe God and their false prophets are going to be tormented forever and with physical bodies in their fires of hell. It is just flat out stupid. It's ignorant. It's religious. And Judaism, we find this fixation on physicality of women having to degrade themselves by shaving their heads, and men degrading themselves by parading around in mourning suits and wearing all sorts of ridiculous contraptions, boxes on their heads and boxes on the back of their hands, as if they're too stupid to realize that God was saying that his Torah guidance ought to guide your actions with your hands and your thinking and your perspective with your eyes, as opposed to putting a stupid box in the middle of your forehead or wrapping a strap around your your hand. It's just moronic idiocy focused on the physicality as opposed to understanding. And to gain this sense of, well, we're superior because we do that. No, it's a parasitical fungus that's called religion. What else is a fungus? Yeast. What is it that Yahweh and Dode removed from the covenant family, who availed themselves of what he did on matzah, which not anybody practicing Judaism can do, because they don't even recognize matzah as a mikra. But if they did, and they knew what it stood for and what Dode achieved for them, it's a lot of ifs, huh? Then they would recognize that it is that parasitical, degenerative fungus of religion that is removed, so that we are perfected and can enter God's presence. But this is the problem with the physicality of the Judaism as well. This is Mashal Word Pictures 1430. And so Dode has encapsulated the purpose of the Choter, the twofold purpose of the Choter. He is to be the Bashar, the one heralding the good news about what Dode has achieved, so that he restores good judgment regarding God's people, getting their inclinations, their motivations, their perceptions, their inclination, this very ability to process information and act upon it right. Because without it, Dode is unappreciative, Yahweh is unknown. This is one of the reasons that Chakmah, intelligence, is the most repeated theme in the King's Ode to the Choter. God's people must be encouraged to forego the religious and political nonsense and think their way back to Yahweh. Now, if I present to a group of Jews who care deeply about Israel that the single greatest discovery in their history, in the history of humankind, is that David is the anticipated Messiah. He is the returning king, that he is the Son of God, that other guy that's acclaimed by Christianity is a complete fake, a fraud that never existed, and that it was Dode who arrived in his second of three lives with his Bashar body and his Nefesh soul in 33 CE to fulfill Pesach as the Passover lamb, doing what is accredited to a fraud, a product of identity theft. That Dode did this, and that Dode fulfilled matzah, having his soul carry the guilt of every covenant member into Sheol to deposit it there to perfect us, so that all who avail themselves of what he has achieved might receive the benefits of the covenant. This is the message of the Choter. But it is only half of the Choter's responsibility, because he will use his Bashar body within 8.5 years of now to redeem this remnant of Yisrael that will finally walk away from religion and politics and embrace Yahweh's name. At the very last minute, just 10 days before, Dode arrives with Yahweh to fulfill the day of reconciliation, Yom Kippurim, in year 6000 Yah, 33 CE. So God's people have to be encouraged to think differently, to act differently, to accept this great gift, the greatest discovery in human history, certainly the greatest discovery pursuant to God and his people. The conditions of the covenant must be known. The purpose of the mikre must be understood. They must be attended. They must be capitalized upon. God's name must be restored. And this timeline, with only 8.5 years left, needs to be known. That is the Bashar's message. So Dode's juxtaposition of Bashar, human herald, and estem, the essential essence of a man, isn't happenstance. He was brilliant, and he lived right in the midst of this. He's part of this message. Our King wants you to know that when it comes to the restoration of our lives, The choices we make while mortal and physical beings determine whether we live as spiritual beings. Should Israelites follow the Bashar's advice and exercise good judgment about Yahowah and Dod, the Bereth and the Mikre? Should they follow what Dod has done and capitalize upon it, they will live. But if not, the degenerative parasitical fungus of religion will continue to infect and destroy them. And in this regard, it is Dod who removed the corrupting guilt of those who exercise good judgment regarding what he accomplished on Chakmah. I guess you have to recognize that Dod performed on Chakmah, and you have to recognize that Chakmah is a mikra. You even have to understand that the covenant is the essence of what he was enabling. You'd have to appreciate the fact that it has 5 conditions and 5 benefits that were met by the fulfillment of the first 3 Moed Mikre, and that he was the Bakor, firstborn son of God, fulfilling firstborn children, Bakurim. It's a lot to take in, isn't it? And it's also counter to what Jews have been told culturally, politically, religiously. And it is so counter to the lies of Judaism with their replacement, Messiah Bar Kokhba, that began it all. In Christianity with their repulsive counterfeit, Jesus Christ. Judaism and Christianity are guilty of extorting and cheating our Messiah, the very Son of God, the one who opened the door to life. Mistreating and defrauding, the one opening the door, says Dod, as the one who opened the door, insults the one who engaged and did this for him. While the one who appropriately distinguishes, honors, and values his significance is favorably inclined toward and generous to, especially beneficial on behalf of the Ebion, those open to and desirous of deliverance. Mashal, Word Pictures, 1431. We are living in the brilliant aura of the most intelligent and articulate man who ever lived, the most capable and compassionate, even courageous man of God, the very man who ascertained why it was essential for him to serve as the Passover lamb by studying the story in the Torah of Abraham and Yishak going to Mount Moriah and fulfilling the first Passover as a dress rehearsal with God himself speaking in the context of father and son providing the lamb. And Dod recognized, I am that son. I will be that lamb. I will go to Moriah 40 Yobel after the promise was made through Abraham and Yishak with Yahowah substituting the lamb. He figured it out. I figured it out. I'm not as smart as he is. But why can't Israel figure it out? Develop the timeline from that point to recognize that is the point for all life on this earth revolves around the summit of Mount Moriah. It all begins with Passover, the doorway that opens, that gives us life. And that we are on the wrong side of that doorway. You are on the wrong side of that doorway when you mistreat and defraud and insult the one who engaged and did this, who opened it for us. He laid it all out here. You know, he's speaking of the Chakmah Choter, his Bashar Herald. And he's telling you the single most important message that he is delivering. He's telling you why he cares so passionately about this man. He is revealing why he is so angry, so disgusted, so intolerant of those who tried to fracture this family and this mission, going off on their own to pursue some moronic mother god cult, claiming that, like Miriam, they too spoke for God. Hell, they do not. You're revolting. But Dowd is protecting his turf. He is protecting his Bashar. He is uplifting his Chakmah Choter, because it is the only remedy for this very thing, the propensity of God's people to mistreat and to defraud the one opening Passover's door. The door to life. It was opened by your King, Israel, your Messiah, the very Makor firstborn of Yahowah. And it is my great honor not only to have discovered this, to have analyzed it, to have proven it, but then to reveal it to you, because it is the essence of your life. I'm now translating a chapter in Yirmiyah that someone in our Facebook covenant family asked me to translate the 16th statement, and I did, and then the 17th, and then the 18th, and 19th, and 20th, and then I went back to the 8th, and I realized that it is this message. It is, God said, you're all disgusting regarding me. You won't listen to me. You won't prioritize my Torah over your Talmud. You've worn me out. I just want to spew you out like vomit. You're just reprehensible, Israel. You have no idea who I am. You have no idea who my son is. You have no idea what we have achieved for you. You've endangered my wrath. And he said, because there's not one of you who would listen and respond to me, I had to choose a witness from outside of you to bring this message to you, particularly at this time in the end, when your homes, your land, even your fields and your women are surrounded by those who would take them all from you. It's your last chance. You can't continue to mistreat and defraud the one opening the door. You can't pretend that you're parading around under his star when he does not have one. That star belongs to the false Messiah Bar Kokhba, the one you insulted his reputation with by conceiving Judaism based upon Akiba's recognition of this false Messiah. You want a symbol? Use the one that I have over my left shoulder. That's the one Yahweh told me to use to reach you. It is his menorah. Dowd is that greatest of the luminaries. He fulfilled the first three of the lights on that menorah, Pesach, Matzah, and Bikurim. His herald, the Chakmah Choter, fulfills the next two, Shabuah and Towrah. So that on the 6th of 7, Dowd returns on Kippurim, and we all live as a family, a covenant family, camping out with Yahweh under our King's sovereignty during Sukkah, forevermore. That's the purpose of that luminary. It is the greater of the luminaries. It is the luminary upon which the two witnesses will stand on the left and right side as olive trees, of course, because that menorah burns olive oil, the very oil that anointed Dowd as our Messiah. It's one cohesive story, and you've missed it all. You've thrown it all away. You don't understand the conditions of the covenant, that they begin by telling you to do the one thing that God says more often than anything else. Here, you identify the religion of Judaism with the ethnicity of being Jewish as if they're one thing, when the single most important theme throughout the Torah and the prophets is stop being religious. God hates religion. If you are religious, you cannot engage in a relationship with God. If you are religious, you are estranged from God. If you are religious, you are an enemy of God. That's the truth. Recognize it. It's obvious. It's everywhere. It is the single most important and reoccurring theme from the beginning of the story in the Torah all the way through the end of the prophets, all the way when God says, if it had not been for what I achieved through my witnesses, I would have destroyed the planet because it's so goddamn corrupt. And that corruption that stinks to high heaven is religion, beginning with Judaism, because it is the rabbis of Judaism that also created the other two abusive cults that have subjugated and dehumanized Jews, Christianity, and Islam. Rather than blaming rabbis and holding them accountable for controlling Israel, for estranging Yehudim from Yahweh, for erasing Yahweh's name, for disparaging, mistreating, defrauding, and slamming the door closed by misrepresenting David. Rather than holding them accountable for having created Christianity by having trained the rabbi who wrote the first 14 documents in that religion and then inspired the next 4. Only a rabbi could have done it. Paul was that rabbi. And then they go to Babylon. Many don't return. They stay in Babylon. They write to their God-forsaken Babylonian Talmud there, arguments against Yahweh. They erase Yahweh's name. They present themselves as if they're more important, so that Jews cite rabbis when trying to prove a point, not Yahweh. And they end up in Yathrib because they didn't come back home to Yisrael. And in Yathrib waltzes in the wannabe Messiah, Muhammad, the warlord, the perverted terrorist, the pedophile, the rapist. And rather than disparage him, they sold him Talmud recitals. They made Islam possible. They completed the Quran. The Quran would have been about this thick without rabbis selling Muhammad Talmud readings, which then Muhammad, of course, twisted. And he claimed that they came from Allah, even though the Quran admits that they were provided by the rabbis. And then the rabbis mocked him for twisting them and for claiming they came from Allah. And so what does a psychopath do? Yeah, genocide. He purposely did genocide against Jews. All of it is because of your rabbis. Christianity, 1,800 years of persecution and subjugation, and worse, piling their religious crap right on top of the most important truth in all of human history, that Dode came in 33 CE, right at the time that he said he would when he communicated this to Daniel. And he fulfilled Pesach, Matzah, and Bakodim, even endured crucifixion, which he wrote about in first person, vividly describing that he would be crucified 1,000 years before he endured it. And rather than accepting it, rather than celebrating it, rather than benefiting from it, you spit in his face. You denied him. And then you replaced him not with one, but with 2 false messiahs, a Jesus and a Bar Kokhba. And you're not even ashamed of yourself. And when the truth is finally pointed out to you, you pretend that, well, I don't even want to listen to that guy. I'll go listen to my rabbis. I'll go listen to my politicians. They're doing such a fine job of protecting me from Muslims, after all. What's wrong with you? And Todd is laying it on the line. You have defrauded him. You've mistreated the one opening Passover's door. The one who engaged and did this on behalf of his Choter, on behalf of his Bashar, and on your behalf too, if you'd wake up, you'd get right in the head. You need to recognize the one who appropriately distinguishes, honors, and values Dod's significance. Not just as the anointed Messiah of God, not just as the chosen one of God, not just as the subject of the 89th Psalm, which is an ode to Dod written by Yahweh himself. Not just the returning king, although that's a pretty important thing, right? But as your Savior. One who not only volunteered to fulfill Pesach Matzah and Bakodim so you might live, so that you might be perfected, so that you might be enriched and empowered and adopted into God's family, but wrote about it in first person and then endured it, and rather than accept it, embrace it, celebrate it, you denied it, and you're still denying it. And when I bring this to your attention, it's like talking to that stupid wall that you bang your heads against every day, pretending that your voices in prayer are more important than listening to God. You will say religiously the Shema Yisrael, not knowing what the goddamn statement says. It's Shema Yisrael. It's not Speak Yisrael. Does that make any sense to you? Yahweh told you, listen, Yisrael, not yibber yabber. Listen, Yisrael. Yemen, listen to Yahweh. 3,000 years. And what does it say? Listen, Yisrael. Yahweh is God. Yahweh is one. Does it say Hashem? Hell no. Does it say Adonai? No. Does it say G-D? Not in your life. The very thing you're told to listen to, that Yahweh is God's name and he is one. You corrupt it along with everything else. And so enters the Chakmah Choter, the Bashar, Dod. He figures it out, the whole story from beginning to end. And he values the significance of Dod, who opened the door, who did this, who engaged to make this happen. And he is favorably inclined towards the benefits that have been delivered as a result of this. And then Dod, that mind of his, he throws in the Ibanon. And apart from me, that doesn't mean anything to anybody. But this whole Mashal, word picture is written for the Chakmah Choter, which Dod figured out would be smart enough, intelligent enough to figure out why he wrote about the Ibion, those open and desirants for deliverance, because that is the only ones that are going to benefit from what Dod has done. But you know who they are. Does that name ring a bell to you? Ever heard of it? Producer over there does. One who's still a little camera shy, but we'll hopefully resolve that. She set preconditions for being on there, as if her appearance being made more beautiful than it already is somehow going to make her more effective as a witness on behalf of her people. So here we are. Who are the Bonim? I know. Of course I know. You know how I got to know them? is when I was trying to ascertain how there could have been two sermons on the Mount. How a sermon so obviously contrary to Christianity, one that destroys the entire religion of Christianity. And there it is in the beginning of a book called Matthew. And it's 3 chapters long, and it is, or 2 chapters long. It is devastating. Every word of it undermines and destroys Christianity. Why is it there? And then you turn to the Olivet Discourse, which does the same thing. It says, if anybody claims to be a Christ, he's out of here. Don't follow them. Don't believe it. And includes some prophecies, but it's very clear that whoever delivered that message knew what he was talking about. Whoever delivered the Sermon on the Mount, he knew what he was talking about. And it's because the Ebion wrote it down. They were the eyewitnesses. Other than Dode as a prophet, being an eyewitness of what he would achieve while crucified and while fulfilling Pesach and Matzah on the way to Bekurim, the only other eyewitnesses, they aren't the gospel writers. None of them were eyewitnesses. Most weren't even in the country. Most didn't even speak Hebrew. No, the eyewitnesses were the Ebion. They wrote a narrative called According to the Hebrew. And they recorded 2 events. And when you look at the book of Matthew, you recognize that 80% of the book is plagiarized from Mark, who wrote the Gospel according to Paul, and Luke, who was Paul's propagandist and faith healer, spiritual healer. And Matthew, 80% of it just pilfered from those 2 sources. The remaining 20%, you got it. He plagiarized the Ebion, or we wouldn't know what they said because, of course, their texts were destroyed. The Romans didn't like anything that was written in Hebrew, and they wrote in Hebrew. That's who they are. And when you figure out who they are, then you now have a contemporary eyewitness account, in addition to Dode providing the eyewitness account, including Yahowah in the 53rd chapter and in the 9th chapter providing an eyewitness account to what happened in 33 CE in terms of, and also Dode as Gabriel, Gabor El, God's most courageous and compassionate man, providing an eyewitness account of what would occur. So you have Dode's eyewitness account through Daniel. You have Dode's eyewitness account through his Mizmor and his Mashal. You have Dode's eyewitness account provided by Yahowah in the 89th Mizmor. You have Yahowah, the great prophet's eyewitness account in Yahowah 9 and 53. And in addition to all of that, you have the Ebion. They're called Ebionites, those open to and desirous of deliverance. They're the ones who are actually named in the Sermon on the Mount. The second Sermon on the Mount, Dode's son would deliver the first of them. Dode, the father, delivered the second of them exactly 1,000 years later on the same place. So this is the story of who they are, and the very fact that I was able to recognize who they are and write about them and their history and distinguish them. And then Dode says, yeah, my Chakmah Choter, he's going to be smart enough. He'll figure it out. And he'll tell you the importance of it all. Because that Sermon on the Mount actually is important. Do not think that I came to annul the Torah and prophets. No. I came to fulfill the Torah. I walked out of the pages of the Torah. It's also the book which warns the world about the wolf in sheep's clothing that would mislead many. The Benjamite, Paul. Yes, indeed. And it said, do not ever believe that there is a Christ in the Olivet Discourse. It's all there for you. All provided by these men, eyewitnesses who wrote in Hebrew, the Ebonites, the Ebon. Well, there's very little more to Christianity than defrauding the Messiah and the Son of God, other than to disparage his people. The fact is, the Savior is Dode. There was never a Jesus, and he opened heaven's door. Mr. Christ is just a crude counterfeit and the product of identity theft, because it is Dode who engaged in our behalf in 33 CE. The one mention of a future Messiah is when Dode spoke of himself through Daniel to us as Gabriel, God's most courageous and compassionate man. No, he's not an angel. It says twice in the text he's a man. And the basis of Gabor is Gabar, which means strong, influential, capable man. Shouldn't have to be a genius to figure it out, but Israel, you haven't managed to do it, have you? I'm not expecting Christians to figure it out. They're stuck on stupid street. But Jews, you should have been able to figure this one out. I did. And I did in 22 years. You had 2,200. The Ebonim, desirous of deliverance, as I have shared, are unknown to most, but they were not unknown to Dode, because he spoke with them in the audience. And they aren't unknown to me because I figured it out. They were the ones who recorded Dode's Sermon on the Mount and the Olivet Discourse, both of which are exceedingly hostile to everything Christ and Christian. The fraud known as Matthew pilfered their narratives without crediting them, just as he plagiarized the remainder of his gospel from Mark and from Luke. But a modicum of research reveals that the Ebonites, as eyewitnesses fluent in Hebrew, were the only ones to actually record something spoken by the real Messiah at this time. Those who know the truth honor and value the significant contributions of the Ebion. I do. Dode did. You should. In this context, by the way, you know why there's no legacy other than references to what they wrote of the Ebion? There is a considerable reservoir of rabbinic literature that denounces them because they actually wrote Yahweh's name. And because they were the principal Yehudim within Yahudah, promoting the true Messiah as Dode against the rabbi and priestly claims of power and their denial of him. The rabbis are on record hunting them down and killing them, but not knowing what to do with their written eyewitness accounts, because their written eyewitness accounts contained Yahweh's name, and it was considered, based upon the third statement written in stone, that to discard Yahweh's name was an unforgivable sin. So what are you going to do? You can't destroy their texts. That's why we have the Dead Sea Scrolls, by the way. Rather than being able to discard something that has Yahweh's name, they had to give it a place of honor in those jars to preserve them. But the rabbis were so threatened by those who knew Dowd, who were the eyewitnesses who recognized this 2,000 years before I did, that, well, they did have a head start. They lived 2,000 years before I did, and were actually in Dowd's presence when he fulfilled these things. That did give them a leg up in this regard. But the rabbis were so disgusted by them, they recorded text that said, in their case, we will burn them. So rabbis, you committed this crime too. Jews, Christianity exists, and you are precluded from knowing God's name is Yahweh and that your Savior is Dowd because of the rabbis. They did this deliberately. They wrote about it and they preserved their confession to the crime in their Talmud. In this context, this is actually stupendously important as a revelation. It means that Dowd, 3,000 years before I became the first to perceive either of these things, that Dowd was defrauded in his role as Son of God, Messiah, and Savior. And that the Ebion should be appreciated for their contribution to exposing this fraud, announced that the Choter and Bashar would restore the fortunes of his people by discovering and proving both revelations. I want you, Israel, to disparage and to distance yourself, to reject the rabbis because of what they have done to you. They created Islam. They created Christianity. They're the ones who disparaged Dowd. They're the ones who erased God's name. They did this all to you to empower themselves, to enrich themselves, to ensure that you would believe them as opposed to God, as opposed to your king. And then they created the very enemies that have tortured you and are killing you. You need to reject these fools. It is key to exposing the greatest fraud ever perpetrated. There is no Jesus because Dowd is the Messiah and the Son of God. And the Ebion were eyewitnesses to this fact. Our king and his father are acknowledged for something that we all should have considered, but very few have. There always was a risk of failure. The reason that this mashal exists is because there was a risk of failure. Had I not responded to the most recent rebellion quickly and decisively based upon Yahweh's resolute prophetic instructions, it could have all been for naught. No website, no books, no outward communication with the webmaster, publicist, and social media maven, bolting with a cadre of co-conspirators that would do everything they could to demean and disparage me in the process, all at the 11th hour. God and Messiah are none too pleased. Wicked and ungodly, Rasha, guilty of criminal intent, as a result of her destructive shepherding against him, disastrous leadership, and her insufferable attitude toward him, with her ruinous wickedness and wrongdoing to fraudulently take his authority for herself. He might have been weakened and tripped up. He might have stumbled. But instead, to the contrary, Sadak, the correct and vindicating one, the one in accord with the standard who is right, righteous, just, proper, fitting and acquitting, provides a safe haven as a trustworthy and protected place, even through his death, in offering his mortal body, which comes to us by way of the Dead Sea Scroll 4Q Rav, Mashad, word pictures, Proverbs 14:32. You know, you just don't know until you know. I know I've said this before, but you're not in a position to revel in these words, to speak intelligently about them until you know the whole picture. You have to know that not only is Dod Sadak, the thing that sets him apart from all others, that he was correct and therefore vindicating about God, but so is his Choter. It is what binds us together. And it wasn't until less than 2 years ago, maybe just over a year ago, that in studying Yahowah's 17th prophetic statement about the fulfillment of Shabuah and Towrah, that I recognized that he was saying that as the Bashar, as the heifer, as the productive one, that I would lay down my life to provide a protected place, a safe place for the remnant of Israel through the death of my physical body. I've shared this with you. And once I read about Yahowah speaking of the Parah on the Shabat of Towrah after the ingathering the previous evening, and recognized that it was to a full solar eclipse, which is that rare circumstance where the moon is actually more prevalent than the sun because the moon comes between the earth and the sun. And that the moon is perfectly sized to do the thing that it is not doing on this one day, which is to reflect the sun's light, to light the darkness of the time of Jacob's troubles and the time preceding it. That to the backdrop of a solar eclipse, I would offer my life on Towrah as the Adamah Parah, the red heifer, as the bloody red man coming from Edom, who saves many. And all of these prophecies now materialize before our eyes. And here is now Dod, the king, who's returning 10 days later after Towrah to a happy homecoming because the mortal remnant of Israel have been spared by the sacrifice of my physical body. He knew it 3,000 years before I would do it. And he wrote about it. It's humbling, isn't it? It takes your breath away when you recognize how all of these pieces fit together to complete this portrait of the fulfillment of the Moed. And why Yahweh said in the fourth day of creation that the greater and lesser luminaries, they would be signs of these very Moed and of the years they would be fulfilled. Since Yahweh intervened immediately with regard to the mutinous, leprous, Motherite cult, supplying the proper retort with the Bamidbar Numbers 12 annihilation of Miriam's claims in this regard, providing a vastly superior team and a new plan, which we began to implement the same day, turning from the wall of written books to a library of video blogs under the YAHOWAH blog and the menorah, I did not feel even the least bit vulnerable. But what if YAHOWAH hadn't intervened? What if Dode hadn't written about this? What if I wasn't steadfast and said, I don't need this grief? What if I had a Moshe moment, as Moshe did? The children of Israel were fractured again, and he said to God, I can't do this. You've given me an impossible job. I want out. That's what they're writing against. That's what they're writing to celebrate that it didn't happen. Could have. I did have free will. It didn't. Because I care more than life itself. So the website was not taken down, and we promptly opened all new social media accounts. Then we built recording studios, lots of recording studios. So failure was never in the offing. Simply began a completely transformative existence. As a man who had spent 23 years, sunrise to sunset, translating and deducing the insights that could be derived from Yahweh's testimony, composing books. A man who would turn his studies into studios so he could look you in the eye and tell you what you need to know at this time based on all that he has learned. As a result, the Rasha, who are Ra'ah, toward who, which is him, may represent the larger audience of religious and political naysayers that we confront every day in social media, particularly on X, who will do and say anything to avoid confronting the fact that they have been proven wrong. And they are quite active, throttling our outreach on X for 2 weeks now, and with many hundreds of posts, really profoundly important posts. We stay at about the same number. X's algorithms and thought police are fiercely in opposition to revealing the truth that exposes the failings of religion and politics and conspiracy. So yes, on X we are throttled. On Facebook we are not. X has become insufferable. But if anything, I'm resilient and I'm going to stay the course, and I will try, but they will try, but even collectively, they don't have the intelligence or the wherewithal to trip up a Choter that is imbued by the 7 spirits of Yah. And all the while, a marvelous Jewish man recognized his Jewishness, recognized the mistake that he had made and implementing progressive thought police. And within a week of the time that we began on Facebook, he fired them so we could prevail. And while Yahweh's admission that I could have been tripped up had he not intervened is rather astonishing, considering the quantity and quality of the books that we had written over the previous 23 years. That wasn't the most revealing part of the previous statement. And by the way, I need to always recognize that with free will, there's always the possibility of failure. Yes, I have read the end, and in the end we prevail. There is a very large, very high quality remnant of Yisrael, and also harvest of covenant members and Yahowah is exceedingly happy with the result, and so is Dode. So I know that we prevail, but we prevail because we prevail. We prevail, just like I said, you don't know until you know. We prevail because we prevail. We stick with it. Every morning we still get up with the sun and go to bed and leave that office long after the sun has set. And we do it 7 days a week. And we are committed to this.
And now you know.
And now you know. Yeah, and now you know. We prevail because we prevail. Because we are committed. I know, and therefore I share. I understand, and therefore I care. I'm going to continue to tell you the truth. And I'm going to be relentless. And you're either going to listen now or you're going to listen later. But you will listen. And you're going to respond one way or another. Of course, if you're rational, if you're intelligent, care about Israel, you care about your own soul, the souls of those in your family, you're going to respond now. You're going to take the time to learn the truth. Yeah, you won't be as popular on X, but you'll be a lot more popular on Facebook.
Or with Yahowah.
And what really matters? Doesn't it matter that you're popular with Yahowah? That you're popular with the returning king, Dode? And that you're popular with those who you have helped find the truth and enter that doorway because you made the decision sooner than later, studied, learned, and shared. And now that Shamayim, heaven, is filled with additional souls, including your children, because you prevailed. You know, not only do we find one of my favorite Hebrew words, Sadak, correct, to be vindicated, used as another title here for the Choter and Bashar. He is the Sadak one. Yahowah announced that I would die protecting his people. That's just my physical body, not my soul. It's no big deal. Now, it is in terms of the benefit it delivers, but I'm happy to do it. Yahowah announced that I would offer my life in this way, just as Dode had offered his Bashar corporal body as the Passover lamb, and that Yehudim might live. The Bashar herald will provide a safe haven for Yisrael on Yom Teruah, the day of the herald, by preparing God's people for the Messiah's return. It even in Yashayah, it speaks of that the crag, which is my name, has crevices, and he has this protective implement, as this rod of divine judgment, if you will, that he uses it to protect this mortal remnant of Yisrael at this fragile time between the final ingathering of Teruah, which is an olive harvest of Yehudim, and the time that the sacrifice occurs the following morning, and Yahowah ignites the flames that cauterize this horrible wound of infidelity and that wash away the filth of religion with the release of waters. And in that very fragile time, Yahowah is depicting me by name and nature, protecting this remnant, and then ultimately saving them, preparing them, restoring them. The Bashar Herald is a safe haven for God's people and the Messiah's return. This is something that I've shared with you I would not come to recognize until retranslating Yashayah, Isaiah 17, for the augmentation of this volume right here. This was a very thin volume. It only covered the two harvests, Teruah and Shabu and Teruah. Well, it's not anymore. Print a book at Amazon, and it's free online at YADAYAH.com. But print a book at Amazon, 825 pages is the maximum. Guess how many pages that is? That would be the right number. I shared everything that I have come to learn about the fulfillment of Shabu and Towrah. I want you to enjoy them with us, participate in them with us. But it was this last translation with an open mind, with this huge foundation of knowledge, that in 2024, after the horrible massacre of October 7th, after I had written Prophet of Doom, turning it into the 5 volumes of Goddamn Religion, after having rewritten again Questioning Paul, turning it into Twistianity in 5 volumes, and reemphasizing the role of the Ebion, that I recognize that I'm going to be the Adamah Parah, and that the sacrifice of the Adamah Parah, the red heifer, occurs on Towrah, 10 days before Yahowah's return with Dowd. The prophet pronouncement regarding, and he spoke specifically, Yashayah did, of the Zeroah's role in fulfilling Towrah, and stated that, well, as the Parah, this should lead us directly to Numbers 19 and the sacrifice of the Adamah Parah, which I translated immediately thereafter. And then it became obvious that the Adamah Parah is the story of redeeming and preparing the adulterous woman of Numbers 5, so that this mortal remnant of Israel is prepared to be betrothed to her returning king. Family reunion, huh? Fractured family is fractured no more. And that this is the same story that Yashayah was also telling when he described this man from Edom who would be bloody red, who would come to save a great many. It's the ultimate purpose of the individual who would be given the 7 spirits of Yah as the Choter. He is a productive bull, and he is especially productive on the day of the herald, Yom Teruah, making this claim through the use of parah repeated in so many places. And here, Dode selected 2 additional terms for bull, Aleph and Shor, because in this mashal, Aleph and Shor says that he's observant, intelligent, responsive as a bull. Doing so immediately after he introduced us to the title of Choter, even went so far as to say, against the pronouncements of the stupidly stubborn and corrupt, a Choter, a rod of divine justice, a stem off the main branch, a productive sucker from the fallen stump, will rise and roar, triumphantly opposing and agitating, performing magnificently on behalf of the Almighty. And so that was a whoop whoop. And so the language of the Chakmah, the intelligent one who learns, who understands, and then teaches, will focus on what he observes. 14:3. Without the Aleph, the learned and productive bull, who increases 1,000-fold, the manger and the crib are empty. The most humbling and inspiring statement I've read in my lifetime. And yet, a great, productive, and abundant tabuah, harvest, will be derived and produced by the authority and capability, the empowerment and the effort of this sure, observant bull who cares enough to help others. Mashal word pictures 14:4. 3 and 4 between those 2 statements. I get a tear in my eye every time I read them. It's humbling to know that you can do something in your life that brings such joy to God, that serves our returning King so magnificently, because the glory of the King is in his family, which is enlarged because of this. One life can matter. And I'm giving mine to you, not only devoting it to telling you the truth now, boldly, relentlessly, intelligently, completely, verifiably, but ultimately laying down my life for you. And to this the prophet concluded, Sadak, the correct and vindicating one, will provide a safe haven as a trustworthy and protected place through his death. 300 years before revealing the nature and purpose of this sacrifice through Yahshua, Yahweh shared the same message through his beloved son, Dod. I find this to be awesomely affirming, profoundly important, and that it also explains why the Zebo Men Edom, the man from Edom, would be bloody red and appropriately dressed in red. For the process of saving a great many Israelites. While the demise of my Bashar body will be momentarily unpleasant, I'm thrilled to do so, not only recognizing that my body won't be of any value to me, and knowing that God will use it to serve his people in a marvelous way, but also because this would not have been foretold without Yahweh realizing that I could be trusted to do as he had asked. Although, keeping it real, it is a bit unnerving to read about one's life 3,000 years in advance, especially acknowledging that with free will, it is technically possible, but unthinkable for me to shirk this responsibility and to screw it all up. Not going to happen. Back when I was initially made aware of how the second of the three phases of my mission would conclude, Yahweh was kind enough to share a vision of it with me, so I've seen how this will transpire. This revelation, buttressed as it has been with the Numbers 19 and Bamidbar 5 presentations of the red heifer and the adulterous woman, combined with Eliah's dress rehearsal for this event, depicted in 1 Malachim 18, in his obliteration of the political and religious establishment of Israel. Think it through, Israel. The man that the rabbis proclaim that they're putting a seat of honor even at the Passover table, the one that you know is returning, is acclaimed for one thing: obliterating the religiosity and politics of Israelis. It will be, when this occurs, the greatest show on earth. With the Choter as the sacrificial victim, Eliah is the master of ceremonies, and Yahweh releasing the cascading waters while igniting the flames which will soar to the heavens. At least I'm going to go out in style. I think we'll stop here. I know we're very close to the end of this amazing word picture that Dode has drawn, but I don't want to tuck his concluding message at the end of this program. And we're still just beginning. We're going from here to a magnificent place with a future prophet, passed from our perspective to Zechariah. And what we're going to read there will dazzle the neurons in your brain. We have a lot to learn, a lot to share. And I thank you for listening. I am Craig Winn, the Choter and Bashar of Yahowah and Dod, and this is their Yahowah blog.